Hello and welcome to The Green Stream, a podcast brought to you by Sustainable Business Network Detroit, a network of partnerships between Southeast Michigan stakeholders, innovators, and changemakers. Each partner is on a mission to advance and amplify sustainable business practices, and we're here to learn from, share, and help activate a sustainable way forward for Greater Detroit. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review and join the conversation on LinkedIn, Facebook, X, YouTube, and Blue Sky. And head over to our website, sbn-detroit.org. Now, let's listen in to our conversation with today's sustainability leaders.
Well, hello and welcome to the Green Stream. I'm Terry Barclay. I'm the president and CEO of Inforum and the chair of the Sustainable Business Network of Detroit. And I have to say that today we really have an all-star lineup. So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. We have with us, and I'm going to ask each of you, to introduce yourselves a little bit more fully. But we have with us Rebecca Jordan, who is MSU professor and department chair of community sustainability at Michigan State University. Dan Pitera, who's dean at the University of Detroit Mercy School of Architecture and Community Development. And Tony Reames, who is director of the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability, or SEAS as we like to call it, Detroit Sustainability Clinic. Each one of our guests has an amazing background. And so can I turn it over? What we like to do is just start out with, tell us a little bit about what you do, but also a little bit of your story. What hooked you into sustainability? What first got you hooked? Maybe it was something from your youth, or maybe it was something more recent, but tell us those stories of how you got involved. So, Rebecca, I'm going to start out with you.
Okay. So if we go way back when I was about 13, which I'm sure everyone wants my life story, but I was a big fan of The Voyage of the Mimi. It was a PBS show. It was like one of Ben Affleck's earliest shows. And I was just utterly taken by the diversity that the ocean presented, the lifestyle, the intricate behavior of the whales. So like I said, like so many kiddos in the world, just these charismatic animals really drew me in. And then as I progressed through school, I learned I got horribly seasick. So a life on the high seas was not going to be for me. Instead, I chose to look at maybe some more landlubbers. And in that process, I began to realize that in an effort to sustain species and to sustain the beautiful diversity we have on this planet, we need to work with people. And so quickly my education shifted to working with learning behaviors in young students all the way up into adults to compel us as a global community to cherish what we have on this planet and really work towards keeping it so the future can share and enjoy.
That's a great story. I think so many of us got our start back. The first hook was something from our youth, right? But maybe Dan will prove us wrong. Dan, what's your story?
No, actually, that like Rebecca, it wasn't a specific point in time. I think as she was talking, I was thinking back myself. It was really more like a life trajectory that was moving, and what made me aware of that is that I went to architecture school in the 1980s at Georgia Tech, and we were taught that from the beginning. It wasn't as if this is something you should add to ability. It was just, this is how you should be thinking and designing. But I had a professor once that's asked me to think back, to imagine a place where I felt safe, where I could be me and not worry about the world around me. And almost everyone in the room that had that it was in a green space. It was a space where we were connected, if you will, by the school personality. My school self was thinking, I'm connected to nature, not thinking that everything around us is nature, but the saying, that works. And then I moved from Atlanta, where Georgia Tech is, to San Francisco, to another place where it's just part of who that's how you design. So it never really felt odd until I moved to a few other places and said, yes, this is a different. And I love that life trajectory that I have that allows me to see it more holistically. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, no, it's always so interesting. I love learning people's stories. So, Tony, last but certainly not least, what a background you have. So, what's your story about how you got hooked?
God, such a beautiful question, and I loved hearing Rebecca and Dan's stories. So mine does go back to youth. I like to tell folks I grew up in a rural community in South Carolina that might be considered a kind of quintessential environmental justice community. My mom was our local town lab tech at the wastewater treatment plant, so I grew up around wastewater treatment and learning that treated wastewater went back into the river, and then it went back into our water system and we drank it. And so that really got me thinking about our waste cycle. And we also have the state's largest landfill. And so I think my connection to sustainability came from kind of like that envisioning that Dan was talking about of a different world or a place that doesn't have so much waste, right? I grew up looking at this huge mound of trash that was coming from all over the country, not just locally, from as far away as New York on train down to South Carolina. And I just thought about, are there ways to reduce all of this trash? And then learning about environmental justice and how communities of color are literally dumped on by other parts of the world, and more wealthy communities. And so I really wanted to focus on kind of that proactive measure to reduce waste and create a cleaner, greener society for all, kind of focused on equity and justice. And so that's how I came into sustainability and also energy justice that I know we'll talk about later. Yeah.
When you're on the receiving end, you think about things.
You think about it differently.
You think about it differently. And so there's always been such a disconnect between our actions as people and as communities and the results. And so I think when we can make those things more transparent and more clear, people think differently and perhaps act differently, we hope. But let's talk about, I'm really curious to hear from each of you, but Tony, this time I'd love to start with you about what are some of the emerging trends in sustainability education that give you hope?
Yeah. So, I spent a few years in the Biden-Harris administration, really focused on this idea of kind of transitioning our energy system to one that's cleaner, more efficient, more affordable. And so I was super excited about the opportunity to really focus on neighborhoods. And I think, we think about our energy system as this huge interconnected set of wires, and but it has a local impact, right? Because if things don't go right, we can't flip our switch. We couldn't do this podcast if we weren't getting our electricity delivered. And there's so much innovation around our energy transition, even when you have challenges politically, you don't have the capital sometimes to actually make it work, but people are innovating. And so, I know we're on a Detroit podcast, but people are down in New Lab in the renovated book building down near the train station, like creating all types of technology to make energy more accessible and more affordable and clean. And it's happening across communities. And so I'm excited to see, like, what does our world look like when energy is more localized, and again, it's more affordable. That is my big hope, is that we can flip our switch at a reasonable price.
Right. You keep hoping that hope.
I
We
do.
will all
I'm
join you.
always hopeful.
We will all join you. So Rebecca, same question for you,
For me, having spent so much time in higher ed and seeing the trends in various disciplines sort of come and go, what's exciting to me about sustainability is that it is now and always kind of was impossible to kind of know it all, right? You just can't sit in enough college lectures or experiences to really be equipped to solve the problems that we may encounter tomorrow, a year from now, and so forth. And so in sustainability education, it's really incumbent upon us to work with students to become thinkers. And that word gets thrown around a lot, critical thinking, how we think, etc. But if we master certain skills, we know problem solving is going to be easier, faster, more accessible. And so the fact that in sustainability, what we're trying to do with students, we really cannot rely on our older metrics and approaches. We need to think about how we're going to get these individuals up to speed in this increasingly hyperlinked world in a very short period of time, and to be able to say, does that make sense? And to feel empowered to say, no, it doesn't, let me learn more. And so sustainability education has that, we almost have the step forward compared to other disciplines when we're thinking about how we work with our students. And then again, what is so great about allowing problems to unfold and giving students that opportunity to really solve it really ties back to what Tony mentioned. It's that local, right? We got real excited about the global community in the 80s and the 90s, but recent years have shown us there are extreme costs to globalization, and we should probably diversify that profile a little bit more. And so we also have this great opportunity to involve communities and learners well beyond the college classroom.
That is exciting, and we're going to have to talk more about that. But Dan, how about you?
Yes, I think what to be brief, to connect what was both said with Tony and Rebecca, both are talking about the space in which we live in and the people who live in the space, right? It's about the people and the place, and they're uniquely linked, and that's and it's not frankly just people, all flora and fauna, right? That's understanding that. And so I think where schools, and Tony made this point of being local, I think understanding that the person in a neighborhood has an expertise, as well as the faculty has an expertise, as well as the student has an expertise, and together we're co-creating. And I see that happening across different schools and different ways, and that's exciting. We have a particular studio that we call the Public Interest Design Studio, where that happens, where community, students and faculty are all working together. And then I would just add really quickly, and the three of us on the call sort of represent this, is that it's no longer seen as a one institution issue. We are working across our institutions together. And I think that's what's exciting, is that we're working together, learning from each other, because together, these are the quote unquote messy issues that will take many of us to work through.
Mm-hmm. So given those answers, and given that you work with students every day, what would you advise a student? What's your one piece of advice, for a student today? And whoever wants to jump on that first. I'll call on you if
I'm happy to dive in. I think one of the things which is particularly unique to our area, and I would say for those who are studying or listening, who are studying or practicing in the Great Lakes region, I think one of the things that I hope our students take away and think about and will constantly work on is understanding that the issues around climate action and the things we're talking about, what makes sustainability urgent, is inextricably linked to climate justice. They go hand in hand. And so it gets back to the point we were all making in an earlier question, where it's the person and the space together. They're not separate. But then what makes it unique to where we are, I think we all have to be thinking about the policies and the systems and the ecosystems that we have that are going to be affected by climate migration. We are living in one of the epicenters where people are going to be moving to. And are we prepared? Do we have the things in place for that to happen? So the students are the ones that are going to be in those positions as they move forward and need to be thinking about that now. So we're altering how we live now and into that future.
That was such a great answer, and it makes me think of another podcast that SBN did about the future of water. And, where we talked about our water infrastructure challenges. And, Tony, to your point about the affordability of that, the issues that if we're going to be the epicenter for climate migration, we're not ready for the population we're carrying now, let alone what might happen in the future. So it's just all kind of interesting, but I'm taking your airtime. So Tony or Rebecca, who wants to advice for students?
Yeah, really great point, Terry and Dan. I'm thinking about, we're generating and creating, we're creating the next generation of leaders, right? And thinkers and doers. And so we can often get hamstrung by the way the system is currently designed. And I think the beauty that we have in higher education is that we have the opportunity to support young minds being molded to think differently, right? Think outside of the bounds of, what we all are living through and have dealt with, because the system was somewhat created by our young minds as we were becoming the leaders. And I see that every day in class when I, try to push students to think of, the way they feel the world should be, right? So we think about that, like give them an opportunity to dream and vision. And then you come back and say, okay, well, what limits us being able to do that? So you can create the solutions to actually overcome it. And so that process of dreaming first without any limitations can be inspiring. And then when you put the limitations on it, can be a little demoralizing, but then they now have the vision that they can begin to think through the limitations in a different way than if they started with the limitations. So dream without limitations would be my advice.
Wow.
Excellent. I would say to students, and I do say to students, get curious, really ask questions. Why? Get creative. That's that kind of, let's break through the ceiling. Let's think about what we haven't thought about before. Let's put ideas together in space that haven't been together before, but also get comfortable. There are 3 C's there with discomfort, because when we work with people and when we work with sustainability, there are necessarily justice issues. There are necessarily power issues. There are these pieces that can feel very heavy, very demoralizing, to use Tony's word, to the next generation. And I don't want to see them lose hope. It's been a rough go for a lot of our Gen Z thus far. And so I want them to keep trying, keep investing, because they really are the generation who has the talent to really see the change that so many of us think we need.
Yeah.
Terry, can I add really quickly? Sorry, can I add to that? Because I think it's the way Tony said that and the way Rebecca responded is so important because many of our students will look at this, and though they wanted this kind of work to be how everyone practices, they've been taught to think that this is an alternative way of practicing. And what we're trying to talk with them and have them sort of the advice we're giving is, no, it's not alternative, or it should not be. It should be, they are really the ones that are going to illustrate how we are altering practice, altering how we live. And I think embedded in the words that both Tony starting and Rebecca completed, I think are really is important for the students to hear that they're the ones that are really have the power to the intellect and the power to alter how we practice, and don't let us old folks begin to sort of dissuade them or discourage them.
So I absolutely love that. And speaking of hope,
Mhm.
what sustainability projects do you have your eye on in Detroit? Tony, that seems like right
Yeah.
up your alley.
Yeah, there, when people talk about, Detroit and Detroit grit, some people like it, some people don't, but I think you can definitely frame that in a positive way, right? It's like the kind of go get it attitude, the ingenuity that we see in the city. And so at the clinic, one of our focus areas is circular economy. And again, that it goes back a little bit to my story about the landfill and thinking about how we reuse items and reduce waste. But I added that to the clinic because there's so many elements of it in the city. I mean, people are recycling tires, composting to do urban agriculture. My PhD student, Madeline Miller, started a company called Next Tiles, where she's taken textile waste from the auto industry and turning it into other products. And so being able to take these kind of individual actions and individual companies and organizations and bring them together to think about a totally new economic model, starting in the city of Detroit, that could be an example for the rest of the country, is something that I'm super excited about. And there are pockets of this happening across the city, and the university as a kind of convener are trying to find ways that we can bring folks together. And so I think it's a wealth generation opportunity. It's a climate action opportunity. It's an educational opportunity. It just solves, so many of the challenges that we've been talking about here today.
Dan, Rebecca?
Or Rebecca, do you want to go? I'm happy.
Yeah, happy to.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I here at Michigan State University in our Department of Community Sustainability, we have a very large group of folks working in the food system, and Detroit is such an
Yes.
excellent sort of living laboratory for localizing assets in the food system to help communities get the access they need to nutritious food, to sustainable supplies, and with minimal transportation costs. So there's a lot of exciting urban ag that's happening in Detroit that, again, I see a lot of folks working on, keeping my eye on. We also, and I happen to be part of this cluster, have a group of folks that focus a lot on decision making within municipalities. And Detroit, once again, a lot of their leadership right now and a lot of the commissions that exist there have been very open to discussions about sustainability, to discussions about community engagement in sustainability, and to find creative ways to make decisions that sort of minimize those negative trade-offs, acknowledging that we're in a world where perhaps win-win-win doesn't quite exist anymore. We know each step has a consequence, right? There are expected losses. How do we mitigate those losses so that we can thrive, so that our communities here in Michigan can be resilient to whatever the next 10, 20, 50 years holds?
I just have to have a little bit of a personal reaction that I'm so glad to hear you say this, because the last couple of meetings of my local village council that I was at were not very encouraging.
Yes.
So it's really great to hear that you're seeing an openness.
Yeah.
And, I hope that we can have more of that, and that local units of government can learn from one another. Again, I think there's organizations like SEMCOG and others that are doing a great job, under Amy O'Leary's leadership there, to bring units of government together to, hear what they're all up to. So glad to hear those words of hope from you. What's your hope point, Dan?
Again, connecting to what was said, I think what I'm gonna hone in on Detroit as was discussed as well, and that is Detroit has had a population that has always been closely connected with civic engagement processes and community engagement processes. I see them as distinctly different. And so the population really does understand how to work together and in wonderful, wonderful ways. And we also have a variety of open space distributed all over the city, because we all kind of know how that got there, but we have that open space all over the city. So that when we talk about food system development, as Rebecca brought up, that's what's so exciting, is begin to see how do we see that land now as not just developing it in the same way that it has been developed before, but now thinking of it in a systemic way, ecosystem way, where we have food system development, which doesn't mean you're not just growing it. You got to transport it. You have local restaurants. It's the whole system. And then keeping that in mind, I see lots of great work on trying to move community solar forward, rainwater remediation. Both before I was dean, I was director of the Detroit Collaborative Design Center, and we worked on policies with the city of Detroit to move those things forward. And that's exciting, that to Rebecca's point as well, that cities are open and actually pushing to have policies like this happen. And I hope then that maybe your village, Terry, can learn a little bit from the policies that are here. So as maybe we could direct them to some of the things that we're doing here.
What's the phrase, Dan? From your mouth to God's ear. That's all.
Yeah, there we go.
So there we go with all that. But you've all talked about students engaging in local communities and in real world, so to speak, projects through clinics and studios. Are there for people listening to this podcast, are there ways that they can support your work or support those students? Or, if students are listening, how can they ask for these opportunities? Someone jump on that grenade.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Okay, well,
yeah, go ahead. You look eager. Yes.
And again, what's very exciting is my department, we are training students for sustainability. We have several different directions, but they're going to go into life, into the workforce with hopefully a suite of skills to help enable and enhance sustainability goals in the future. So all of our students have to have an experience where they're out there engaging in practical, real world problem solving. And again, that's one of those things that gets thrown around quite a bit. But for perhaps the partners, folks who want to engage students in their sustainable businesses or practices, one thing that I think is really important is allowing the student to be able to try out some things on their own, make mistakes. That's how we learn. And encouraging them to work through that mistake. Too often I see so many wonderful partners really just kind of hand-holding that student right through, which is great. But then when at the end of the day, when the student needs to go off and kind of do it on their own, it becomes much more daunting. I also tell students, yes, we require one, but get as many as you possibly can. How often have you, learned something really complex just based on one trial, right? We need more experience thinking this way, doing this way. So any chance they get to even volunteer for a one-day experience, I encourage them to do it. It's going to really build that confidence that helps them get the jobs and really participate in this sustainable life workforce, as I call it.
Yeah. Tony, you were gonna.
I'll jump in about the Detroit Sustainability Clinic. It actually started from a recognition that several faculty at the university were partnering with community groups, the city government of Detroit. Some of us were working with the same community partners on different projects, and that is still, I don't think something that any of us could solve, but it was this idea that we needed to be a little more holistic and collaborative in the work that we were doing with folks in the city. And so the clinic was created as this kind of two-way conduit for the community to connect with the university, as well as the university to connect with the city and to begin to see our impact, right? Like, how are we evaluating our projects and our work? And are we focused in certain communities and missing other communities? And so I call the clinic our kind of climate and sustainability solutions hub. And so we have a variety of opportunities to partner with folks, whether it's short term. So we do 100 hours of technical assistance. We call it sustainability assistance. We have 18-month capstones where a client could have 4 to 5 students and a faculty advisor on some pressing sustainability or climate issue. And then we have some intermediate projects that, maybe 3 months, 6 months, or a year. And so you can follow us on LinkedIn or reach out to participate. We're always looking for clients. And then our students sign up to work with clients based on their skills or based on their interest. And so, again, trying really hard to do real world projects for the learning and education component, but actually beneficial projects for clients and partners.
And Tony, you're being so modest. Wasn't the sustainability clinic your brainchild? I mean, I think
no, I would not. I won't take full credit for it. No, it was really no. I'll be honest. It was a collaborative effort. It was definitely a project of passion for many of us, and I'm super honored to be leading it right now. So yeah.
The only thing I think I would add is that, and I'm sure all 3 of our institutions have this, is that the takeaway for the students that I would give is reminding them how they entered our school. And what I mean by that is, frankly, they interviewed us. They wanted to know, were we teaching this stuff? Were they wanted it, and that maybe, to Tony's earlier point, they could maybe feel, after learning more and more and seeing real world projects, as you had in your question, they may become discouraged. We say, no, you really are. We're providing you with the knowledge, and frankly, with your degree, have the power to now go and help make that not the norm. And so I'm just sort of repeating what I said earlier, but the takeaway is to remind them, you came in with this desire and you were interviewing us to make sure we were going to meet that. I think that's quite a powerful realization that they take away with, that they came in a bit naive, but with the desire, and then they leave with the knowledge, and hopefully the desire is still there.
Can I also add, I think it's important for individuals, and I encourage students to do this as much as they can, to sort of get out, get around. If you grew up in Detroit, explore other areas of Michigan. If there are places that can take you for an internship, if you grew up in one of our more rural communities, come to Detroit, come to Lansing, engage with people, because people at the end of the day are really what's at the heart here. And it's very easy for us to kind of other and put ourselves on one side, them on the other, when we don't know them. And so getting out there, being a part of a group of people that you really don't know quite yet, helps you to begin to see different lived experiences that can explain perhaps why we see what we see, but also point us to a direction where we can truly and genuinely work together. And I tell students, gosh, if you hate that thought, it's going to get real hard in the future for you. So I would love to get these kiddos, these students, if you will, around, even myself. The more I can get around and talk to people and meet people with different lived experiences, the better off I am, the better off the project is.
That is so. Sorry. No, go ahead, Tony.
No, jump in out. Yeah.
Okay. I would just say to that point, I mean, if sustainability by its very nature isn't about a singular person, right? Or are you saying the same thing, Tony? I'll just say just the takeaway is that it's a co-creative process. And again, to whether it's the resident, the business owner, the faculty, the student, all together. That was all I was going to add, Tony. Go ahead.
That's so, I mean, I was just, as Rebecca was talking, I was just looking at that word community behind her, right? And, kind of the core definition of sustainable development from the 90s was that we, needed to live today so we protect, future generations. And so it wasn't just about individuals, it was about the larger society and our whole earth, right? And so when we think about sustainability, it is bringing people together to think about a better world, and then that intergenerational thought, like we're not thinking just about ourselves in this moment right now, we're thinking about the future. So if that's the kind of mindset you have, whether you're a student, faculty, business, local NGO leader, then sustainability is the place for you. And you might not call it that, but that's what you're working on and doing.
Exactly.
It's really interesting. Each one of you has, I don't know quite how to say this, has a lens on human interaction as being at the core of your work. And so I'm hoping that each of you can comment a little bit on that specifically. Rebecca, I know that a lot of your work focuses on that particular issue of human interaction with the environment and the information that people are provided. And you have this whole thing I think you're doing about citizen science and how can that help expand. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit, and then Tony and Dan, I've got things for you too.
Yes. And I should say my work, it feels like it's ever changing. And I think information is ever changing. How we receive it is ever changing. Generations are getting smaller, and we are seeing individuals interact with information in so many different ways. It's easy to get overwhelmed. And worst, in my mind, it's easy to buy into an idea that maybe doesn't have a lot of support simply because somebody who might be savvy at using their platform, their communication, makes a case that that speaks to an individual's identity type or speaks to in some way, hey, this is how I view the world. That person seems to get me. I'm going to kind of dig into what they're saying. And it excludes the big picture, first and foremost. And it sometimes, and more times than I think I'd care to admit, people are putting that information out there because they want something very distinct and discrete from you. So they're not actually giving you an entirely accurate, let's just say, picture of a situation sometimes. And that your sources of media can sort of manipulate and constrain and fuel information in different ways into our lives. And so for me, the idea of how we look at what individuals are consuming media-wise, how they're thinking about it, where's that reasoning, and how can they counter that with experience and with data that they know enough about to be able to trust. And that's really hard, right? We are all not experts in everything. That's how we started out this discussion. And so you want to trust proxies who you think are going to give you what's in your best interest. And that has been, I'm afraid, quite exploited across the globe. And so for me right now, the real passion is keeping up with the ways in which people take in information, kind of hold it in the back of their minds to let it change or affect their worldview. And then what they subsequently do with that is so critically important. And sometimes some of the larger projects, which are wonderful don't really allow us to get down to the nuts and the bolts. And so a lot of the work I do, it's either really big or really, really, really small. I feel like there's nothing we do around here that's middle ground, because we're trying to understand individuals and we're trying to put them in very big systems. And so that challenge is very exciting to me, because I'm learning every day to be able to understand where and how and what these sources of information are. I get to see where and how and what's going on in the world, which is fun for me personally, but also can get a little scary sometimes when you see how our own cognitive biases and traps, it has nothing to do with intelligence. It just has to do with us being humans, how those can be exploited sometimes for outcomes that most of us do not want. And so to me, it's not just an interesting project of passion, it's a necessary one as we think about tomorrow and what the world's going to look like then.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Reactions?
Yeah.
Connections to your work?
I think, there are some connections, particularly in the energy space, right? I think, you're talking about a super technical topic, and most of us just know if we flip our switch, we hope that lights come on. But trying to actually bring that down to folks being active participants in the energy system, whether that's from a decision-making perspective and knowing how to create public comment for the Public Service Commission, who decides how much we pay, regulates the utilities and what type of energy they deliver to our communities, whether it's clean or fossil fuel based, all the way to how energy is being generated and moving through your home, right? Like, how can you participate in smart meters or programmable thermostats? And then you have to have the internet for that. And so there's kind of all these topics that, if our goal is to provide cleaner, more affordable energy, what does the individual energy user need? And how do we simplify that, but also, not discredit that local knowledge that we were talking about earlier, right? Like people knowing different things about the seasons and when they need to turn their heat on. And so the information is overwhelming. Technology is allowing us ways to kind of break it down. But it comes back to communication and how we communicate with people. And communication can be very personal, should have some cultural relevancy. And so I love bringing students to different communities to, kind of talk about energy. And so a simple thing that we've done on the information front is helping people read their DTE bill. And so we've set up, kind of a few years ago, we did what we call family energy nights in a public housing community. And so people would sit at different tables with the students and pull their bill out. We talked to them about the different fees on their bill, how that was different than the amount of energy they use, and figuring out how they could reduce their energy costs. And so a super simple activity, but it was so beneficial to folks because, one lady was saying that she had some relatives move in with her. And so we were able to say, oh, well, they moved in with you a month ago. You had additional $20 on your electric bill. And she was like, oh, I need to charge them $20 now for living with me. So, just the very, like I said, a simple activity, but super meaningful when people have additional information that they feel empowered to be able to do something about.
One of the things that I was thinking about, and there is going to be a connection here, but one of the things that I was thinking about when Rebecca was speaking, and now in Tony's example there at the end, was if you imagine an experiential exploratory museum where you have a room and one person kind of looks really small and the other person looks really big from this one particular angle. And then you shift that angle and it all falls apart, right? In architecture, we'll say you have a false perspective. And in the perspective, it looks like it's really long, but only from that viewpoint. You turn around or you flip it to the other side, it completely falls apart. So I live by a phrase that I sort of, I've even made a pin out of it that says, if it works, then it's obsolete. And because if something is working, it's probably working from that angle, from that exploratory museum perspective. But then when you shift, maybe it's no longer working so much. So it may work okay for the bottom line, or it may work okay for this particular population. But then when you shift, that maybe other populations it's not working for, or maybe there should be more than the one bottom line, and so on and so forth. Right? So I think that as I was hearing that, it just sort of went back to that part of my mind, and it then saying, well, that's great advice for the students. They have them constantly think that if the things they take for granted, the things they think that work, should be the things that we question the most, right? It's a cliche, but that's really what we're talking about when we think about sustainability. And to Tony's point earlier is that if we flip on light, we take that for granted. We need to question it. So.
Dan, I was in a business meeting yesterday where I could have used that phrase. If it works and it's obsolete.
Feel free. I don't need any credit.
Can I also add, though, it's really an invitation for the community to participate that I think is so important. And so often I see the talent, the capability is there. I've had people come to me and say, oh, I finished with a GED. I didn't go to college. How can I do this? And you can. You have the tools to engage with this. And there are people who want to help. There are people who want to communicate the science. Just because I went to grad school and got a PhD in this one area, I still rely on those intermediaries to help me understand in areas I don't have the expertise in. So we're all in that same boat. And if we can just kind of elevate that discourse just a little bit more, I think it would just be very powerful for communities to realize they do have, as was said earlier, the power. And so often it gets taken from us, and we're our own worst enemy in that. And so with everything I've heard and continue to hear on this, it's like, please join us. It's your livelihood. Participate would be like the bumper sticker I'd put on the back of my car. You can put if it works, then it's obsolete. I'm gonna put engage, part of it, participate.
That's really great. That's really great. Dan, and I feel badly because we're kind of running out of time really quickly here. We've had such a great time talking, but I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit, because I know urbanism is sort of at the center of your work too, to talk about the differences that you see between equity and ecology in terms of sustainable urbanism. If you had anything more to say about that.
Thank you. I really think, and I think I can be brief with this because we've said things that I'm going to say in various different ways throughout this podcast. I truly believe that you can't think about sustainable urbanism without thinking about people. So Rebecca, we've all said that, and so if you then say it's about people, then and if you then say also that climate action and climate justice are inextricably linked, then it's not just about people, then it is about the equity of people, and that we should be thinking of all people. If we really mean sustainable urbanism, it's about all people, not just some people. If we're, I don't mean to be too academic there, but when we think about, but we're academics, when we are thinking about what it means to truly be sustainable, we're talking about all people. And then we are talking about all kinds of energy, all kinds of things, all simultaneously bringing that together. I think that's, for me, as succinctly as I could say in that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure does. Well, we like to close and leave our guests with sort of a takeaway of some kind of practical step that they can take. So given all of your work, that practical step could be for students, it could be for members of the community who want to be supportive, or it could be just for each one of us who are working on ourselves to, on our own journey here. So let me start with Rebecca on that one.
At the end of the day, I think I simply could not agree more that we do not have sustainability without equity. It does not work. It does not happen. Regardless of how you feel about any human or groups of human, it can't work. We need to be there. And so as we think about that, I believe it boils down to trust. And I encourage people to really think about those individuals or those institutions or organizations that you have seen an outcome of, that you've seen action on the ground, doing what you believe in, what you want, how they are representing you, and then go to those people. You have that ability to participate. You have the knowledge, the talent, the thinking skill. If anyone thinks they don't, they can call me up and I'll show them they do. And so for me, it's really important to expect more out of the organizations, out of the institutions that serve you, hold them accountable, and find those folks that you really can trust and dig in, because that's what's going to help you become impervious to some of the nefarious causes that sometimes pop up around communities. And it's really, I would say, at the heart of resilience. It's building your grit, your temerity, and what it is your community needs with each individual to continue to deal with change. And change is here to stay. So let's get to work.
Yeah. Dan, how about you?
Sure. I'm thinking of two things. One, and they connect with, as we've been doing quite well, I think, connecting with what each are saying. The first is a phrase I just was saying this to our students on Monday, of having skeptical wonder. I really still believe that we should have wonder towards the world, looking out and have an optimistic view. But we need to interrogate what we have and what we see, to Rebecca's point about being clear about the data we have. And so we should be skeptical. It shouldn't be blind wonder or naive wonder. It needs to be skeptical. Be skeptical about what you see and so on. And second thing, though, is I was having this dialogue with my daughter, who happens to actually be studying in Australia in grad school for marine biology. Perfect place for that. Where we're talking about some of the things she had to buy in terms of moving there, and she was saying, why is this so much money for this or so much money for that? And I said, maybe the question needs to be not why that costs so much money, but why is that so cheap? And thinking about the inverse and saying that's so cheap for things that if we actually understood the production process, we would be horrified. And I think the four of us know that, but have people truly dig in and interrogate that as well. Then interrogate what they are purchasing and looking at.
Yeah. Tony?
Wow, not enough said there. One point I think that also connects what Rebecca and Dan were mentioning, particularly on the data side, the data we don't have, right? And I often say the data we don't have is the problem we don't see. And so sometimes if you have a question about something and the data doesn't readily exist, that's an opportunity, right? Data that we need to collect so we can actually understand the problem and potentially develop a solution. My advice and takeaway would be this idea of procedural justice, the opportunity to participate in decision making at any level. Terry, you talked about your village meeting. There's so many examples of sustainability in action in other cities that we can begin to learn from each other. And so for folks that want to get engaged and may live in a community where sustainability is not at the forefront, don't fret. Find some city that might have a policy, might have a committee. I live in Farmington Hills, and we just brought back our innovation, energy, and sustainability committee, and are trying to think about what does it mean to be a sustainable suburb. And so we're working with Make Food Not Waste to understand a potential for composting. But there are all these other examples of cities that might have some type of composting plan. And so we're pulling those together to figure out what works in our town. And so you can look to examples. Again, sustainability as a topic has been around for a long time, but the elements of sustainability have been around much longer before we were calling it that. And so don't feel like you have to start from scratch, but start somewhere. And so that would be my takeaway.
Well, Rebecca Jordan, Dan Pitera, Tony Reames, thank you all so much for joining us on the Green Stream today. I know that I learned so much, and I'm so grateful for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's truly a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to the Sustainable Business Network Detroit, the Green Stream podcast. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure to follow us on sbn-detroit.org and stay tuned for more conversations on sustainability from inside and around the city.